Stepmother decides to lock her young stepdaughter in the bathroom to go to the beauty salon without worry. But when the biological mother finds out, she does this. Kathleen, a 10-year-old girl, saw her mother, Margaret, as her greatest strength and refuge. Since she was little, she had felt a deep fear of being alone at home, a feeling that seemed to have been with her from her earliest memories. This fear was something everyone around her knew and respected. They never left her alone for too long. However, her reality didn't always match that care. After her parents' separation, Kathleen moved in with her father, Charles, who, although he provided material stability, was often absent. He worked long hours, leaving the girl under the supervision of his new wife, Olivia. Olivia, however, never showed patience or affection, treating Kathleen with a coldness that made the girl shrink even more into her solitude. The figure of Margaret, her mother, was the complete opposite of all this. Even though she didn't have custody, Margaret was always present in some way. Kathleen knew she could count on her for anything, a school question, a difficult moment, or simply to hear about her day. Her mother's frequent visits were like little rays of sunshine, warming her life in the middle of a grey routine. When they couldn't meet, the long phone conversations made Kathleen feel less alone. Although the time with her mother was limited, every moment was full of love and care. On the hardest days, it was the thought of Margaret that made her keep going. The girl knew deep in her heart that even through adversities, her mother was there for her, holding her firmly like an anchor in the middle of a storm. Kathleen clung to Margaret's strength as something essential, like a silent promise that everything would be okay. One day, after lunch, Kathleen was in the living room, sitting on the couch with her legs crossed, watching cartoons on TV. It was the kind of moment that usually brought her some comfort, even though Olivia, her stepmother, was in the same house. Olivia, in turn, was sitting in an armchair nearby, flipping through a magazine with an air of boredom. The atmosphere was relatively calm, but peace was interrupted by the sharp sound of Olivia's phone ringing. She sighed, picked up the device from the table, and answered without taking her eyes off the magazine. "Hello? Yes, it's me." Olivia paused for a moment, frowning. "Today? No, today is impossible. I'm taking care of my stepdaughter." Her voice tone carried an evident irritation. Kathleen, still watching TV, heard Olivia sigh again. "Reschedule? Fine. But when?" Olivia asked. And the answer from the other side of the line made her face twist in displeasure. 2 weeks. Only in 2 weeks. She lowered the magazine and looked directly at Kathleen, who noticed the shift in attention and shrugged her shoulders. "This is ridiculous. How do you not have any times before that?" Olivia grumbled, tapping her fingers on the side of the armchair. The silence from the other person on the line was replaced by a muffled voice. But Olivia was no longer paying much attention. Her eyes were fixed on Kathleen, almost as if the girl were responsible for her frustration. All right, she said finally, almost spitting the words. "I'll go today, no matter what. You wait for me, because I'll figure out how to get there." Olivia paused, still staring at Kathleen as if the girl were the cause of her frustration. "Yes, I'm handling it, just wait." She hung up the phone with a sharp motion, almost throwing it back on the table, the dry sound echoing in the room. It took a few seconds before Olivia got up from the armchair, adjusting her hair and looking at Kathleen with an expression mixing irritation and disdain. "I'll be back soon. Stay here and don't make a mess," she said, her authoritative tone cutting through the air like a knife. Kathleen felt her stomach tighten. Her eyes left the television as she murmured with a trembling voice, "Please don't leave me alone." "Oh, come on, Kathleen," Olivia retorted, putting her hands on her hips. "You're 10 years old. This ridiculous fear of being alone. Grow up a little." Tears began to form in the girl's eyes, and she shook her head. "Please don't leave me. I'm scared. I don't want to be alone, please." The crying came before she could even control it. Olivia sighed again, but this time with a look of pure disdain. Oh, what a drama. This is getting tiresome. You know what? I already know what I'm going to do. Kathleen tried to contain herself, wiping away her tears as Olivia, irritated, quickly got up from the armchair. Without saying anything more, the woman walked toward the hallway with firm steps, leaving the girl paralyzed for a few seconds. But when Olivia turned around and with an impatient gesture ordered, "Come here, Kathleen," the girl felt her heart race. Reluctantly, she got up slowly, each step following the growing apprehension in her chest. When she reached the end of the hallway, she saw Olivia standing in front of the bathroom door, holding a key in her hand, looking at her with an impatient expression. "Go in," Olivia said impatiently. Kathleen looked at her, confused and fearful. "Why? I said go in," Olivia shouted, completely losing patience. Frightened, Kathleen obeyed, entering the small room while looking at Olivia with growing fear. As soon as the girl crossed the door, Olivia slammed it shut, locking her out. "You're safe in there," she said, laughing cruelly. "I won't be long." With that, she turned her back and left. Kathleen, still trying to process what had just happened, softly knocked on the door. "Please, let me out. I promise I won't bother." But before she could hear any response, the sound of a door slamming echoed through the house. Kathleen held her breath, trying to stay calm, but the sound of a car engine starting and driving away broke her fragile courage. It was then that panic took over her. "Olivia, please no, come back!" she screamed, pounding on the door with all her might, her desperation growing with each passing second. Tears streamed down the girl's face as she cried, sobbed, and begged to be heard. The fear that had consumed her since childhood was now uncontrollable. The emptiness of the house seemed like an overwhelming entity, and every bang on the door was accompanied by a scream that echoed without response. Kathleen's despair increased with every second. The girl's small fists hit the bathroom door incessantly while she screamed and cried, the words coming out in sobs. "Please, someone help me, please! I don't want to be alone!" The echo of her voice seemed to fill every corner of the empty house, blending with the muffled sound of birds outside. Amy, who was in the yard of the house next door tending to some flowers, heard the screams. The sound made her immediately drop the pruning scissors. At first, she thought it was a misunderstanding or a joke, but as the screams grew louder and more desperate, she realized something was wrong. Amy left the flowers behind and ran to the fence dividing the houses. "Kathleen," she called with growing concern, "is that you?" Kathleen's screams became clearer as Amy got closer to the side of the house. Looking up, she saw the bathroom window, where the sounds seemed more intense. "Kathleen, it's me, Amy. What's going on? Is everything all right?" Kathleen, hearing a familiar voice, ran to the window and between sobs responded, "Amy, please help me. Olivia locked me in the bathroom and left. I'm alone. I'm so scared. Please get me out of here." Shock took over Amy. "What? She locked you in? Oh my God, Kathleen. Don't worry, sweetheart, I'll help you. Just tell me what exactly happened." Kathleen, still crying, explained everything between sobs. "I begged her not to leave. I'm scared of being alone, but she got angry and locked me in here. Please help me, Amy. I'm so scared." Amy ran her hand over her forehead, trying to think quickly. Her mind was a whirlwind, but she knew she needed to act. "Calm down, Kathleen. I'll do something. Stay there, sweetie. I'll be right back." With trembling hands, Amy took out her phone and dialed the fire department. The call was answered quickly. "Fire department, what's the emergency?" A calm voice on the other end of the line asked. "Yes, it's an emergency," Amy said, her voice full of urgency as she tried to stay calm. "I'm a neighbor here. A girl is locked in the bathroom. She was left alone by her stepmother who drove off. She's terrified and crying so much. You need to come now." The dispatcher asked for more details. "What's the address?" Amy quickly provided the address while casting worried glances at the bathroom window. She's only 10 years old, and her stepmother locked her in the bathroom before leaving. I think she's really scared of being alone. Please send someone fast. We're sending a team to the location, the dispatcher reassured her. Please stay nearby and keep the girl calm until we arrive. Anything else we need to know? No, just come quickly, please, Amy said before hanging up. She put her phone back in her pocket and returned to speaking with Kathleen. Kathleen, sweetie, listen. I've called the fire department. They're on their way. Don't worry. You'll be out of there soon, I promise. Stay calm, okay? Kathleen, still trembling with fear, felt a small sense of relief in Amy's words. Will they take long? She asked, her voice still shaky. No, sweetie, they're on their way right now. Stay calm. I'm here with you, Amy said, trying to sound confident. Despite this, her heart was tight with anxiety. While waiting, Amy decided she needed to call Margaret. They had known each other for years, ever since Margaret still lived in the house with Charles and Kathleen. They had become great friends back then, and even after Margaret and Charles' separation, they kept in occasional contact. Now, Amy knew only Margaret could comfort her daughter. With a heavy heart, she grabbed the phone and dialed the number. The call was answered quickly. Hello, Margaret. It's me, Amy, she said, her voice full of urgency. Amy, what's wrong? Margaret replied, surprised. You need to come here right away. Olivia locked Kathleen in the bathroom and left. The girl is terrified, Margaret. I've already called the fire department, but you need to come now. What did she do? Margaret shouted, the anger clear in her voice. How could that woman do this? I'm at work, but I'm leaving right now. I'll be there as fast as I can. Come, Margaret. She needs you, Amy replied, relieved that Margaret was on her way. I'm on my way, Margaret said without hesitation. Amy, stay with her until I get there, and please keep me informed. Of course, Amy said, hanging up. It didn't take long for the fire department to arrive. A fire truck pulled up in front of the house, and 2 firefighters quickly got out. Amy ran to meet them. Here! It's here! She said, leading them to the side of the house where the bathroom window was. She's in there, Amy explained, pointing to the window. The girl has been crying since her stepmother locked her in. The woman left by car and left her alone. The firefighters heard the sobs coming from the window as Amy explained what she knew. One of them asked, Who else lives here? Do you have the contact information for the responsible person? Yes, her father, Charles. I have his number, Amy replied. Please call him, said the firefighter. Let him know we'll break into the house to get the girl out and ask him to come here as soon as possible. Amy took out her phone and dialed Charles. When he answered, she didn't hide her anger. Charles, it's Amy. Do you know what Olivia did? She locked Kathleen in the bathroom and left. The girl is terrified. What? How could she? Charles asked, incredulous. Yes, that's right. The firefighters are here and they're going to break into the house to get Kathleen out. You need to come now. I'm on my way, Charles replied quickly, hanging up. Meanwhile, the firefighters prepared to enter. Using specialized tools, they managed to open the house door and then the bathroom door. As soon as the light flooded the small space, Kathleen ran out, her eyes red from crying. She hugged one of the firefighters, sobbing, "Thank you, thank you." The firefighter smiled at her, trying to reassure her. "It's okay now, little one. You're safe." Soon after, Kathleen ran to Amy, throwing herself into her arms. "Thank you, Amy. I was so scared." Amy held her tightly, stroking her hair. "It's okay, sweetie. I promised you'd be okay, and here we are. You're so brave." The firefighters approached, squatting to be at Kathleen's level. "Are you okay now?" one of them asked. The girl nodded, though she was still trembling slightly. I'm, she whispered, her voice faint. While Amy and the firefighters tried to calm Kathleen, Charles arrived at the house at high speed. He jumped out of the car and ran, his face pale and his breathing labored, clearly alarmed. When he saw Kathleen crying in Amy's arms, he froze. Quickly approaching, he asked, "What happened? Is Kathleen okay?" Amy, who was still trying to console the girl, looked up angrily. "What happened, Charles? Your wife locked your daughter in the bathroom and left her alone, terrified. How could you allow this? How could you not see what kind of person is caring for your daughter? I didn't know. I never imagined she would, Charles started to say, but Amy interrupted him angrily. Didn't know? That's no excuse. You're her father. It's your responsibility to know who's taking care of Kathleen. You failed her, Charles, Amy said, her voice firm and full of disappointment. One of the firefighters, who had been watching the interaction, also approached. Sir, I need to be clear. What happened here is a crime. Leaving a child alone, especially locked in a bathroom, is serious neglect. The girl could have been hurt or panicked. This could have had much worse consequences. As the legal guardian, you need to be more careful about who's caring for your daughter. Charles swallowed hard, the weight of the words hitting him. Without saying anything, he took out his phone and dialed Olivia's number, his hands shaking with rage. When she answered, her voice sounded carefree. "Hi, babe. You come home right now," Charles shouted, cutting her off, his voice so loud that everyone around could hear. "Now! I don't want excuses, just come." Before she could respond, he hung up the phone forcefully and stuffed it in his pocket. A few minutes later, Olivia arrived hurriedly, her face alarmed when she saw the fire truck parked. She got out of the car and ran toward the house. "What happened here? Why are the firefighters here?" she asked, looking around, but before she could say anything else, Charles stormed toward her, yelling in fury. "What happened? Let me tell you what happened, Olivia," Charles shouted, advancing toward her, his face red with rage. "You locked Kathleen in the bathroom and just left. How could you do that to a child? To my daughter? What kind of cruel and irresponsible person does something like that?" His voice was so loud, it seemed to echo against the walls of the house. Olivia took a step back, visibly uncomfortable, but tried to justify herself. "I didn't think it was that serious. She just needed to stop with all that drama. I wasn't going to be long." "Didn't think it was serious?" Charles exploded, interrupting her before she could continue. "Do you think this is normal? Do you think it's acceptable to leave a 10-year-old child who's scared to be alone, locked in a bathroom, crying and terrified? Is this what you consider not that serious? You've completely lost your mind, Olivia." Olivia tried to speak, but Charles continued, even angrier. "Do you have any idea what could have happened? What if she hurt herself? What if she panicked and did something stupid? Or do you not care? Because to me, it's clear you don't give a damn about Kathleen. You're just a selfish, irresponsible person who shouldn't be anywhere near a child." He was gesturing wildly, pointing at her as he continued yelling. "I trusted you. I left my daughter in your care thinking you had at least a little respect for her, that you could take care of her. But you don't deserve even the title of stepmother, much less anyone's trust. You're not just a disgrace, Olivia. You're a danger." Olivia tried to interrupt, her voice shaking. "Charles, you're exaggerating. Exaggerating?" Charles interrupted, even angrier. "You destroyed every bit of trust I had in you. You have no idea the damage you've done to Kathleen, the trauma that girl will carry because of you. Don't give me excuses, because nothing you say will justify what you did. You disgust me, Olivia. Disgust me." Olivia fell silent, unable to respond. Charles panted in anger, his fists clenched as he took a step back, trying to control his breathing. But his expression made it clear that he would never forgive what Olivia had done. Meanwhile, Margaret arrived. Her car stopped abruptly in front of the house and she ran out. She didn't waste time observing the confusion. She walked right past everyone, her eyes fixed on Kathleen, who was still in Amy's arms. "My love!" Margaret shouted, kneeling beside her daughter and pulling her into a tight hug. "I'm here, darling. I'm here now. Everything's fine." Kathleen started crying again, this time with a clear sense of relief. "Mom, I was so scared," the girl said through sobs, squeezing herself against Margaret. "I know, my angel, I know. No one will ever do that to you again," Margaret promised, stroking her daughter's hair. After a few minutes, she looked at Amy, still holding Kathleen. "Thank you, Amy. Thank you for being here for her. I'll never forget this." Amy nodded, emotional. "Of course, Margaret. I'd do anything for her." Margaret then stood up, still holding Kathleen by the hand. Her expression immediately changed when she looked at Charles and Olivia. The tenderness and concern for her daughter gave way to uncontrollable fury. She let go of Kathleen's hand, took 2 steps forward, and pointed her finger directly at Charles. "You!" she shouted, her voice full of anger that seemed to echo throughout the house. "How could you? How could you be so negligent, so irresponsible as to leave our daughter with this woman? A woman who has no care, no love, no respect for a child. You knew Kathleen's fear, Charles. You knew she couldn't be alone. How could you be so stupid, so incompetent as a father?" Charles raised his hands in a defensive gesture, trying to explain himself. "Margaret, I didn't know she would do this. I trusted Olivia. I thought she..." "Didn't know?" Margaret interrupted, taking another step forward, her finger still pointed. "You didn't know? That's your excuse. You're her father, Charles. It's your responsibility to know, your responsibility to protect Kathleen, to make sure she's safe, loved and cared for. But no, you were so worried about your work, so busy with your own life, that you didn't even notice what was happening in your own house." Charles tried again, but Margaret cut him off before he could say more. "You're a failure, Charles, a complete failure as a father. You know what Kathleen told me? That she's afraid of being alone, afraid of being ignored, and all because you couldn't prioritize your own daughter. She needs you, Charles, but you weren't there. And what do? Leave her with this horrible woman. You should be ashamed." Margaret's anger reached its peak, and she looked at Charles with such a sharp gaze that he took a step back, shrinking before the weight of her words. "You don't even deserve the title of father, Charles," she said, her voice full of contempt. Charles lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze, his face marked by shame and guilt. But Margaret wasn't done. Her gaze immediately turned to Olivia, and without hesitation, she moved toward Kathleen's stepmother. Before Olivia could react or say anything, Margaret raised her hand and gave her a strong slap across the face. The sound echoed through the room, and Olivia stumbled backward, holding her face, completely stunned. "You!" Margaret shouted, now completely consumed by rage. "How dare you? How could you do this to my daughter? Lock her in the bathroom like she was an animal. You're a cruel, cold, and selfish woman, and you don't deserve to be around any children." Olivia, trying to compose herself, brought her hand to her face and tried to speak, but Margaret didn't allow it. Before Olivia could say anything, Margaret grabbed her by the hair, pulling hard as she shouted, "You knew she was afraid of being alone. You knew she was terrified, and you locked her in and just left like she didn't matter. What kind of monster does that?" Olivia started shouting, trying to break free. "Let me go, you crazy woman. I just needed some time for myself. She was crying too much." "Crying too much?" Margaret shouted even louder, pulling Olivia's hair harder. "She was crying because you were cruel, because you're a horrible woman who only thinks of herself. And you still have the nerve to blame a child for being scared? You're pathetic, Olivia. A disgrace. You should never have gotten close to my daughter." Olivia tried to say something, but Margaret didn't let her. Before Olivia could say anything, Margaret grabbed her by the hair again, shaking her with fury. Olivia began to scream, trying to break free. "Let me go, you crazy woman. I just needed some time for myself. She was crying too much." "Crying too much," Margaret shouted even louder, pulling Olivia's hair harder. "She was crying because you were cruel, because you're a horrible woman who only thinks of herself. And you still have the nerve to blame a child for being scared. You're pathetic, Olivia, a disgrace. You should never have gotten close to my daughter." Olivia tried to break free, but Charles and the firefighters quickly stepped in. Charles grabbed Margaret by the arms while the firefighters pulled Olivia away, who was now completely disheveled, her face red with rage and humiliation. "This woman is crazy!" Olivia yelled, pointing at Margaret. "You're a monster, Margaret! A monster! And this girl is as dramatic as you!" Margaret tried to break free from Charles's hold, but he held her firmly. "Shut up, Olivia!" she shouted, still trying to advance. "You don't have the right to say anything. Nothing. You're nothing but a mediocre woman, heartless, and that's all you'll ever be." "Enough," one of the firefighters said, his voice firm. "This situation has gone too far. Mrs. Olivia," he continued, pointing at her, "what you did is serious neglect, and it will be investigated properly. Be prepared to face the consequences." Charles released Margaret, and she walked back to Kathleen, pulling her into another tight embrace. "You're safe now, my love," she whispered, her voice still trembling with anger. "I'm here, and no one will hurt you again." Kathleen, still sobbing, held onto her mother tightly. "I was so scared, Mom. Don't leave me again." "I will never leave you, my angel. Never again," Margaret promised, gently holding her daughter's face. Kathleen looked up at her mother, still with tears in her eyes, but for the first time that afternoon, she felt truly safe. While Margaret comforted Kathleen, the police sirens echoed down the street, signaling that the authorities had finally arrived. 2 police officers got out of the car and quickly approached, receiving a detailed report from the firefighters. After hearing everything, the officers advanced toward Olivia, who was still trying to compose herself after Margaret's verbal confrontation. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us to the station to clarify the facts," one of the officers said in a firm voice. "To the station? What? This is absurd. I didn't do anything wrong," Olivia protested, but the officer interrupted her. "Abandoning a child in a risky situation is a serious offense, ma'am. Please cooperate," he said, as the other officer grabbed Olivia by the arm. "You're all crazy!" Olivia screamed, trying to break free, but she had no choice but to follow the officers. She was placed in the police car and taken away, as the neighbors watched the scene with reproachful looks. The silence that followed seemed to carry all the weight of her actions. Charles, standing at a distance, seemed frozen. He had neither the strength nor the words to intervene. He simply watched Olivia being taken away, fully aware that everything happening was the direct result of his negligence. He knew he had failed, not just Kathleen, but himself. In the following days, the consequences were swift and clear. Olivia faced charges of serious neglect and child abandonment. She was ordered to pay damages to the family and to perform community service. Her relationship with Charles ended, and she disappeared from Kathleen's life forever. Charles, for his part, lost custody of his daughter. A court ruling transferred full responsibility for Kathleen to Margaret, who didn't hesitate to embrace this new phase of their lives. Charles tried in some way to make amends. He apologized to Kathleen, but the bond that had been broken would take time to rebuild. Although he continued to try to get closer, the space between father and daughter remained considerable. For Margaret and Kathleen, however, it was the beginning of a new chapter. Margaret's home became a place filled with love, care, and security. Their daily life was simple, but every moment was filled with deep meaning. Even facing the challenges of raising her daughter alone, Margaret was determined to give Kathleen a happy life, free from fear. Over time, Kathleen began to overcome the trauma. Her mother's constant presence, unconditional love, and the help of a therapist allowed the girl to regain her confidence and learn to cope with her fears. The bond between mother and daughter grew stronger than ever, a true fortress against any adversity. In the end, life brought both of them a fresh start. Although the road to that point had been difficult, mother and daughter knew that they were together, facing everything as a team. The love that united them was stronger than any obstacle, and finally, the future seemed full of hope and possibilities. Thus, Margaret and Kathleen moved forward, leaving the shadows of the past behind, but carrying with them the certainty that as long as they were together, They could overcome anything. After all, their true strength was the love they shared. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.